Hello and welcome. I'm your host, Joseph Vick with U.S. Space and Rocket Center, and on today's program, we'll be discussing NASA's newest Mars exploration rover, Perseverance. Now, NASA designed the Mars 2020 rover, Perseverance, to better understand the geology of Mars and to seek signs of ancient life. The Martian exploratory mission will land within Jezero Crater, and it is designed to collect and store set rock and soil samples that could be returned to Earth in the future. Perseverance rover will also test new technologies to benefit future robotic and human exploration of Mars. I'm here today with Lockheed Martin Systems Engineer Angela Adams. Angela and her team at Lockheed Martin are responsible for the technology and engineering behind the rover's heat shield and aeroshell and the Mars helicopter delivery system, the technology that will deploy the Mars helicopter for the first helicopter flight above the surface of Mars. Now that's exciting. Angela, welcome to the program.
Thank you.
All right, well, let's get started. So, Angela, tell us about what you do at Lockheed Martin.
Sure. So I've been lucky enough to be working on deep space programs the whole time I've been at Lockheed Martin. So some of those include Juno and Maven and OSIRIS-REx and InSight, which are all very interesting programs. But obviously today, talking about one of my favorites, Mars 2020. So for Mars 2020, I was both a systems engineer and an electromagnetic compatibility engineer. So I know both of those are kind of unusual engineering fields. So systems engineering is kind of looking at a very high level what the whole overall Mars 2020 needs to do, making sure all the pieces come together and making sure everything will fit together and talk together electrically when everything comes together. And then also electromagnetic compatibility engineering is whenever you get a little electronic device from the store, you get that piece of paper that says complies with FCC, and you usually just throw it away. But that's actually electromagnetic compatibility, making sure your new cell phone, if you put it by your laptop, won't make the screen go haywire or something like that. So we need that here on Earth, and then also on everything we send to space too.
Oh, wow. That sounds like fun and complicated at the same time. Well, the Perseverance rover that your team is assisting with is traveling to Mars to seek an ancient life. So to look for ancient life, discoveries or past potential for ancient life, and to collect rock and soil samples along the way that eventually will hopefully make their way back to the Earth. Can you tell me a little bit about your team's role in the 2020 rover mission?
Sure. Yeah. So for Mars 2020, working with NASA JPL, Lockheed Martin designed and built the critical aeroshell systems, which is the back shell and the heat shield that will protect Perseverance on its cruise out to Mars and during its entry, descent, and landing through the Martian atmosphere. So right now, if you were actually in Florida peeking inside the tip of the stacked rocket, you wouldn't actually be able to see the rover. You would see the cruise stage and the aeroshell. So the aeroshell consists of the back shell and the heat shield, and they mate together to totally surround Perseverance and its sky crane and its parachute. So it's a whole encapsulation around the rover that will keep it safe on its way to Mars. And then the other part that Lockheed Martin worked on is the Mars helicopter delivery system. So its job, similar, is also to protect the helicopter during launch and protect it during the entry, descent, and landing. And then it will actually help deploy the helicopter down to the ground on Mars so it can take off and fly around Mars.
So that piece of new technology of the Mars helicopter system is something that's revolutionary. That's never been done before. How exciting was it to work on something that is going to be in the history books as something that's never been done before?
Very exciting. It was very interesting to see the helicopter. It's got a 4 feet long rotor blade, but it only weighs like 4 pounds. So it's just interesting to see how somebody even came up with that. And then, I think everybody's very excited to see something fly around Mars. Nothing's ever been flying around in the solar system before.
That's true. So overall, we have established in the past, NASA has sent many missions to Mars, and we have determined that still today, even though the engineering of those really cool engineers and the projects they've done, Mars is hard. Getting there is hard. Launching is hard. All these different payloads as they get larger and larger. So engineering spacecraft to travel and operate on Mars is, and we've determined that it's challenging. So what makes Mars such a challenging environment?
So yeah, lots of different things. So with all deep space missions, it has to survive a long journey. So for Mars, it's to get 6.5 months to journey out to Mars. And then once it's at Mars, it's tricky because there's a time delay between Earth and Mars. So it's going to be somewhere around 15 minutes on average. So Mars 2020 has to be able to make all of its decisions by itself. There's nobody person there running a joystick to make sure it's in the right spot. It's all automatic. And especially the entry, descent, and landing, it's often called the 8 minutes of terror. But by the time we get the information back on Earth, it's all happened. The EDL is over. So it is terrifying, but there's nothing we can do about it. It's all done automatically. And then for Mars itself, it's a very difficult place to land in the solar system because of its thin atmosphere and its difficult terrain. So as part of it, Mars 2020, during the entry, it has temperatures around 3,800 degrees Fahrenheit and forces 12 times that of the Earth gravity. So nothing easy about that. Very, very difficult things we have to take into mind when we're designing.
Speaking of the heat shield, so with reference to the heat shield and aeroshell, what makes those such important components as it's going through the atmosphere of Mars?
Yeah, so the toughest job is, again, the entry into Mars there. So the whole overall aeroshell, it has a special shape that is specifically designed to act as kind of like a brake to start slowing Mars 2020 from the 12,000 miles per hour as it enters the Mars atmosphere, start slowing it down till the parachute deploys and helps slow it down even more. And then the heat shield specifically, we talked about that 3,800 degrees. So the heat shield is pointing towards Mars and taking the brunt of that whole temperature there. So it's made of very special thermal materials that can withstand those heats, obviously. And then inside, the rover is actually only at 50 degrees. So the heat shield has a very important job of keeping the rover thermally safe during that entry. And then the back shell has a lot of different jobs. So most importantly, the actual rover and the sky crane are mated to the back shell there. So that's what holding it in place through all of launch and entry and descent. And then less known, the back shell actually contains some masses that keep the Mars 2020 balanced, so it can enter at right the exact angle that we need for to land safely on Mars. And it also holds the parachute system that will help slow down the Mars rover to the appropriate speed for the sky crane to start working and land the rover safely on Mars. And another interesting thing that the aeroshell contains is that it has a suite of instruments called Medley. There's some pressure sensors and some temperature sensors in there that are taking information all throughout the entry, descent, and landing, and that'll give us information for future Mars missions, just making sure we're designing to the right temperatures and pressures.
Now, inside this aeroshell and heat shield, Perseverance is there, but Perseverance isn't alone, so it'll be traveling with Ingenuity, which is the name that has been given to the first ever Mars helicopter. So how will Lockheed Martin's Mars helicopter delivery system deploy? So how will Ingenuity be deployed for us to see and experience the historic first test flight on Mars?
Sure. Yeah, so the helicopter Ingenuity actually rides on the bottom side of the rover. It's kind of called its belly, so underneath, kind of by the wheels and everything. And the first job of the Mars helicopter deployment system actually starts way back during launch. It has a shield over it and some mechanisms that hold it in place so it doesn't move around and get damaged in any way with the very sensitive rotor blades when we're going through all the launch vibration and, again, through the entry, descent, and landing environment. And part of the Mars helicopter also has a solid cover on it. It's called the debris shield because while we're landing on Mars, there's a lot of dust and debris that's shooting everywhere. And since the helicopter's on the bottom of the rover, we have to keep it covered up so it doesn't get covered in dust and wouldn't be able to fly right. So then after we land on Mars, about 2 months later, after Perseverance lands, then we get rid of that dust cover. There's not really dust being stirred up anymore. So we get rid of that cover, and then the Perseverance will drive to an appropriate spot for it to start flying. And then after we do some checks and make sure that the helicopter and Perseverance are good to go, the delivery system will start its release. So it releases 5 different steps to get the helicopter from a horizontal safe position to get to vertical, and then it can drop down and start flying around Mars.
So what sort of factors or particular challenges did Lockheed Martin have, and you're working with your engineering team, have to consider when building and designing that delivery system and the helicopter as a whole?
Sure. So, there were a lot of different ones. One in particular that I remember was making sure that during deployment, there has to be contact between the rover and the helicopter just to make sure they can talk to each other and know the status and health. But it's a helicopter, so you can't have a bunch of extra weight hanging off and cables hanging off to talk to this. So there was a very interesting challenge there to figure out the kind of pinned connection that should be between the two that is as light as possible and can separate when you need it to, so it can start flying. And has its own solar panels to give it power, and it's its own separate helicopter, and just kind of sends over the air any sort of information back to the rover.
So will it come back and reconnect to?
No, it will not.
It's deployed. It's its own unit to go and explore.
And then another interesting thing for me as a systems engineer was it's not just how do we build the hardware, it's how do we do to make sure it will work when it gets to Mars. How can we test it here on Earth? So there's kind of standard things like we think about for most spacecraft, making sure it'll work at the super hot and super cold temperatures. But it was also more unique things like we talked about that dust shield. I actually shot some dust at the helicopter deployment system and making sure everything would still work after it had some fine dust all over it.
With the helicopter system, what is something that you are most excited about seeing that it may discover, or what are some things that you really want to see that the helicopter system will give data back?
Oh, I think just the idea of being able to fly on Mars is crazy. And then think of all the things we could, once there's people there, even we could use helicopters to help transport things around, and just I think it would make exploring Mars a lot easier. You can go a lot farther distance with a helicopter than you can do with just a rover on wheels.
So you mentioned moving things. So does this have any capability or some future technology that is being worked on that could transport?
Not this one, not yet. But I think that's one of the goals of the helicopter, just learning what we can about flying on Mars, and then all sorts of unlimited potentials of think of all the things we do with flight here on Earth that maybe, depending how this exhibition of technology goes, we could hopefully apply at Mars.
Mars 2020 rover Perseverance is only one of many things Lockheed Martin has designed and worked with NASA to do and make history for all kinds of space exploration. So what can you tell us sort of other missions to Mars or other things you're working with currently that are super exciting?
Yeah, so for talking about Lockheed Martin, we've actually been involved in every mission to Mars, 21 in total since the 1960s, since starting way back with the first landers in the 1970s, all the way through InSight that just landed a few years ago on Mars. And we've been involved in building aeroshells for lots of the missions to Mars too. Right now, I think one of the most interesting concepts for Mars is the Mars base camp that Lockheed Martin's working on, which is going to be for people at Mars. It's going to be an orbiter around Mars. It involves an Orion spacecraft and some area for living in, some area for doing lab work in, and then hopefully eventually a lander that can actually go land on Mars. So there's a lot of neat ideas out there for what we can do with Mars. All the different orbiters and landers and rovers that have been there already are giving us lots of useful information that'll hopefully lead to people on Mars one day.
Well, it sounds to me like Lockheed Martin is the resource for Mars exploration. So they've done lots of good things in the past, and hopefully in the future we'll have even more exciting things. So you mentioned the Perseverance Rover, and we've mentioned the Mars helicopter. Where can our viewers go to learn more about Lockheed Martin's things, engineering, upcoming projects? Where can they go to find out more?
Yeah, so just LockheedMartin.com has all sorts of information about what projects we're working on and what projects are launched, and we actually manage the missions. There are several missions that are actually on orbit right now, so you can go learn about those also. So pretty easy, just LockheedMartin.com. Learn a lot of cool information about space there.
And for our viewers that can be young up-and-coming engineers, scientists, potential future Lockheed Martin employees, what would be your advice to the next generation of scientists or engineers that wanted to grow up and work and do engineering for Lockheed Martin?
Yeah, sure. So I think one of my most important things I've learned is just be sure to ask questions. Everybody wants to share what they know, and if you'll never know unless you ask. So spend lots of time asking questions, and then don't be scared to try new things. That's certainly how I've figured out what my favorite things to do are is at work is ask questions. And when somebody says, "Hey, I need help with this, do you have time?" I'll say, "Yeah, sure do. I wanna learn about that aspect of work." And also, so ask questions and try things, and yeah, just seize the day, I guess.
Great. So thank you very much, Angela, for your time. This has been a great overview of the newest, soon to be the next rover roving around and exploring Mars. Thank you for your time. Thank you for what you do at Lockheed Martin. And final question is, where will you be to watch the launch?
Ooh, well, it's a little bit early Mountain Time, so I think I'm gonna have my computer all set up, and I'm just gonna roll out of bed and watch it on the NASA TV website, and hopefully go back to bed afterwards after a successful launch.
All right. So most of America, I think, in the world will be watching it from their desktop or their phones or iPads. So again, thank you very much. Thank you for the work that you do, and looking forward to seeing Perseverance and the helicopter system roving and flying on Mars.